Hello, and welcome to the next session of HUBDAY's Data and AI for Business Conference. My name is Christian Ward, and I'm the Chief Data Officer of Yext. Today, we're going to talk about natural language processing, or NLP, and artificial intelligence, and how they're changing consumer behavior, specifically as it relates to search. As Chief Data Officer with Yext, I work in market with our customers and partners to help them identify, structure, and deliver the right answers to their customers' questions through search. In this process, I get to see across different industries, geographies, and vastly different digital experiences. What's incredible is that whether it's healthcare, finance, tech, retail, government, even direct to consumer, there are incredible similarities in how customer behavior is changing and how quickly that change is forcing businesses to rethink their digital strategy. To understand how consumer behavior is changing, let's start with the common challenges that all consumers are facing, no matter what their journey. So let's start with the information overload paradox. Now, you've probably heard different names for this paradox in the past. Too much information, analysis paralysis, and so forth. The paradox demonstrates that as the amount of information we have access to skyrockets, our ability to process that information actually declines. You have no doubt experienced this feeling in the past, but let's use today's conference topic as a quick demonstration. When I go to Google and I type in the phrase AI for artificial intelligence, I'm met with almost 4 billion results. 4 billion. To put that in perspective, if I read one article every second and I went through all 4 billion, that would take me roughly 127 years to complete that task. Because of this massive data overload, people and consumer behavior is changing. We are all learning to now ask more detailed questions and not just keywords. In fact, last year, Yext analyzed all of the search queries across our client base where we had data available and found that longer queries, meaning those that were 6 or more words in length, were 55% more likely than short one-word queries to capture a customer's click. Just examine what happens when I search for Data and AI Conference in Google. We drop from that 4 billion results to only 495 million. Or if we go a little further and ask, how is NLP and AI changing customer behavior? That query gets us down to just under 3 million results. So we've now dropped from 4 billion to 3 million just by adding a few words of clarity to our initial keyword search to make it more like a query. We can even go one step further and ask, how does Christian Ward from Yext think search affects customer behavior? And now we get all the way down to just 45,900 results. That's 90,000 times smaller than the number of search results we started with. The problem with information overload is that it disconnects our ability to process our options in a meaningful way, often leading to frustration and indecision. And the problem is not getting better. In fact, it's getting worse. Years ago, IDC predicted that the amount of data online would double every 2 years, and that's been holding true. However, that prediction did not take into account the growth in online content and data we will experience thanks to artificial intelligence systems like GPT-3, which can now write content, generate images, even produce code all on its own. GPT-3 is a platform from a company called OpenAI that I have tested. I'm also tracking dozens of new companies that will leverage this natural language generation, or NLG, for massive content generation and distribution. For example, today I typed into GPT-3 the following statement. If AI can now produce content more accurately than humans and more efficiently, where does that leave us? GPT-3 responded with a 1,500-word article that begins with the following. The future of content will be built on a foundation of AI. As more brands and agencies use AI to power their content production, the industry will see an explosion in creative output. That's not so bad. And honestly, the whole article would probably do well if produced and published. In fact, here's another article that was written by GPT-3 that was one of the most popular articles in The Guardian last September, receiving tens of thousands of views. So the customer journey is facing an explosion of data and information, and they are learning to cope by increasing their query length. Which brings us to the second challenge they are facing, where AI is also taking a leading role. Many of us grew up in the age of linear persona marketing. We talk about linear customer journeys, meaning there's a starting point, a series of steps or touch points, and we track them to a conversion event like a sign up or a sale of an item. Persona marketing is essentially trying to build different linear paths for different types of people at different stages of their lives. For example, I'm definitely in the middle-aged, has teenage children, data geek persona category. Typical marketing funnels have relied on this approach for years. They have a person they have identified on the left-hand side and the outcome, sale or conversion, on the right-hand side. Marketing content, ads, billboards, radio, TV, it's all designed to get the person on the left to convert on the right. The problem is, no one does this anymore. When was the last time you had a question about a product or a service? You went to that company's website, ended up on the brand's landing page, and perfectly followed the step-by-step path to conversion that they had laid out for you? Yeah, me neither. Nobody does that. Instead, we do this. We go all over the place looking for information and the best options available to us. The customer journey now takes us literally in any direction, and search has taught us to do this. When customers can't find the information they are looking for, they bounce off your site and they go back to Google, where unfortunately they are quickly redirected away to other sites, to Google's own other sites, or to your competition. Now, here's unfortunately where the problem of consumers bouncing out of your customer journey becomes an even bigger problem. Instead of digital marketers fixing or focusing on a better journey to answering customers' questions, they turn to cookies and other tracking technologies to follow you wherever you go. Cookies have long been the consolation prize to marketers, where their persistent ads and retargeting is meant to bring you back to their site where, you guessed it, you're placed right back in that terrible linear persona flow that didn't work the first time. But all this is changing. From GDPR to the California Privacy Rights Act to the new law in Virginia, consumers and people in general are getting fed up with the creepy tracking. Using the personal data of individuals to build profiles on every human on Earth is the next great battleground, where not only regulatory and governmental agencies are weighing in, but the technology companies themselves. Google is almost done phasing out all third-party cookie tracking coming next month, and Apple has already done so. Add on to that the new iOS 14 requirement that allows people to block apps like Facebook and others from tracking their activity when they install the app, and you are looking at a complete upheaval of the way advertising has worked for years online. With the understanding that creepy technology profiling our every move is on the out, how are brands to personalize their messaging? After all, wasn't personalization the absolute holy grail in marketing of the right message to the right person at the right time? Well, as it turns out, that only applies to when the visitor to your site has an account, is an active customer, or has given you active consent. In fact, Gartner research in December of last year predicted that 80% of marketers will abandon personalization efforts by 2025. The new customer journey is a combination of the explore and exploit trade-off, where consumers leverage search technology to analyze all sorts of different opportunities and paths before they choose to actually take an action. So here's where we are. People are drowning in too much information. They bounce all over the place looking for the right or correct answers to their questions, and they don't like creepy tracking technologies following them around. Where does that leave us? How do we enable a brilliant customer journey that leverages NLP and AI? Let's start by examining the difference between search and query. For years, people have used the words search and query interchangeably. Unfortunately, this isn't true. Search and query are not synonyms, and building an amazing customer experience depends on breaking this relationship down. The word search comes from the Latin word cercare, which means to wander or to encircle, which is exactly what keyword search is really all about. When we ask a broad query like AI, and we encircle an area of possible results, you end up with a massive amount of information. This is why search and circus are actually descended from the same word, because query or keyword search really is a circus. A query, on the other hand, comes from a very different Latin word, querere, which means to ask, to question, or to seek. A question is where several conditions, like Christian Ward from Yext, HUBDAY Conference, AI, each of those conditions overlap and should result in a much smaller number of results and a much more direct customer journey. So where do we start? How do we build an amazing search experience that builds trust, cuts through all that extra noise, and doesn't rely on creepy tracking to provide a truly personalized experience? The best way to start is to think about how natural language and AI will affect your customer's journey and how they think through the questions that they ask. Every question can be divided into 4 different categories in a 2x2 table. Start with whether the question is branded or unbranded for the 2 columns. Then, whether or not the question is an objective question or subjective question for the 2 rows. The 4 resultant boxes in the table will really help focus your approach and get you to a better understanding of the types of questions people ask. Let's start by looking at a non-branded objective query for something more fun, like Scotch whiskey. When you look up Scotch whiskey, you are going to see 50 million results for something that's, relatively simple query. The problem is it's not quite a query yet. It's actually a search. When you think about from search to query, there's an entire continuum from those 4 boxes and how they relate to the customer journey. If we move on from there to an unbranded subjective question, like what's a great single malt Scotch whiskey? That's going to move down the curve to where there's much fewer results. And those results are going to be closer to what the person was actually looking for. As a brand, these are all unbranded searches, and they are important because there is a massive amount of people that still start their search and their customer journey in the keyword area. But once we make the jump over to the branded query, for example, a branded subjective query would be something like, what's the best Macallan whiskey to give as a gift? That subjective query is now even smaller in terms of the number of results, and it's where brands can really start to have a big impact. But if you continue further down the curve and ask the branded objective query, which is something like Macallan 18 delivery in Boca Raton, Florida, that level of query is very detailed, and it turns up only a few number of results in Google and in other experiences. When we focus on moving from search to query, the goal of your brand is to answer those questions even on the left-hand side as the traffic is very high, and help the customer to ask more and more specific questions to the query on the right-hand side. The beauty of this approach is that conversions, which I would argue is a great arbiter of the trust that people have in your brand, increases as you move to the right. We know this because the longer the query, the more detail that the consumer is willing to share in their search question, the more information you have to give them a delightful customer experience. At Yext, we use knowledge graphs and search technologies to make this experience work. From the knowledge graph for your brand, we actually go to market with this data and information of objective truth in 3 different ways. We start with building a real-time API network, feeding your knowledge graph data directly to platforms like Google, Bing, Yahoo, all over the world, over 175 different platforms. We do this to ensure that no matter where someone looks in a third-party app or ecosystem, your data is directly answering those questions. The next thing we do is Yext builds structured data pages using schema markup with the exact same data that's in your knowledge graph. This is designed so that crawlers will analyze your website pages and understand that all the facts that were also just sent through those real-time APIs are also present on your website. Lastly, Yext powers natural language search using AI on your site. So when people have questions and they ask those deeper queries, really wanting to know when do you open, what do you have, what products and services can I get tomorrow with COVID-19 restrictions, that sort of query, an actual detailed question, can be answered through natural language search directly on your site. The beauty of this approach is that with one platform, we can help no matter where the customer journey begins, move them from search to query, to build that trust so that if they ask in a third-party platform, or they look in a search engine, or they ask the same question directly on your website, we guarantee that the information is directly from your brand. This is the way to build an amazing customer journey through search. One of the beauties of this approach is human beings, all of us, are fundamentally signal processing engines. When we ask a question in one place and we ask the same question in two other places and we don't see the same answer, it actually lowers our confidence in that information. But if I were to ask the questions in all three of these areas, including your own website, using natural language, I would have extraordinary confidence in the information being provided to me in my customer journey. At Yext, we continue to build these technologies, and we hope that you will join our masterclass after this, where Jimmy Barons and Frank Negro will be presenting how to build an absolutely exceptional customer journey, regardless of the questions. With that, I want to thank HUBDAY for the opportunity to present today, and I thank you.